All right, so we're diving into the Watcher house today.
Oh, yeah, the creepy letters and all that.
Exactly. We've got these excerpts from the Case File podcast.
Okay.
And I got to say, even for true crime,
It's a wild one.
it really is.
Mm.
And the fact that it's still unsolved just adds to the whole thing
Oh, for sure. It's like one thing to listen to a story where, they caught the guy, but
when it's just out there.
yeah, it hits different for sure. Like, how do you even move on from that?
Okay, so let's set the scene. 2014, Westfield, New Jersey. Picture this idyllic, quiet town.
Affluent suburb.
Yeah, exactly. Big houses, tree-lined streets, the whole 9 yards. And right there at 657 Boulevard is this beautiful 6-bedroom Dutch colonial.
Like a dream home.
Seriously. And for 23 years, as John and Andrea Woods lived there, raised their family.
But then they decided to sell.
Right. And that's where things start to get a little weird.
Uh,
Just before they moved out, they got this letter.
the Watcher.
Yep, it's on the Watcher. They didn't think much of it at the time, figured it was just some prank.
Probably thought it was kids or something.
Easy to dismiss it when you live in a place like that. Safe and quiet.
Right. You don't expect something like that to actually be serious.
Yeah. But looking back, it's kind of chilling to think that this letter was just the beginning.
Yeah, the first sign of trouble.
Okay, so fast forward a bit.
Yeah.
Derek and Maria Broaddus, they buy the house.
Their dream home.
Totally. They're over the moon excited.
Yeah.
Big plans, renovations, the whole 9 yards.
I bet they were already picturing their life there.
Oh, absolutely.
Yep.
But then just days after closing on the house, Derek gets a letter in the mailbox.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, no return address, thick black penmanship addressed to the new owner. And let me tell you, the words inside were not exactly welcoming.
What did it say?
Well, it started off all normal, like welcoming them to the neighborhood, but then it took a dark turn.
Like how?
The Watcher talked about watching the house for years, said their family had been watching it for decades.
Creepy?
Super creepy. And then it got even weirder. They started mentioning specific details about the house and the family. Like they mentioned the renovations that Derek and Maria were planning. They even talked about the kids.
No way.
Yeah, I called them young blood, which is just...
Oh, God, that's just chilling.
Right. It's like something out of a horror movie. Those creepy lines like, I see you.
Yeah, it's like they wanted the Broad-Deuces to know they were being watched.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it worked. Derek was freaked out. Called the police, turned off, all the lights, went into full lockdown mode.
I can't imagine what that must have been like.
To be in your dream home and suddenly feel like you're in a nightmare.
Yeah, and to think it was just the beginning.
Right, because it wasn't just one letter.
There were more.
A couple of weeks later, Maria finds another one. And this one gets even more personal.
Okay, no, that's just messed up. Like, how much more personal could it get?
Well, this time the Watcher mentions the family's names, the kids' nicknames, even details about their stuff and routines.
They knew their names.
Yeah, it was like they were being stalked. And then they started talking about the basement and the attic, making these creepy implications about the kids' safety.
Oh my God, that's awful. Like, how do you even function after reading something like that?
You're living in constant fear.
Yeah.
You never know if the Watcher's out there watching you.
So the police are involved, the Broad-Deuces are terrified, and they've only gotten 2 letters so far.
And it's only going to get worse from here. So we're talking 2 letters. The police are on the case trying to figure out who this Watcher is.
We figure with all the technology we have these days, it wouldn't be that hard to find someone, but this case just goes to show you it's not always so easy.
Definitely. So the police are doing their thing, talking to neighbors, looking for any leads, and they find out something interesting.
What's that?
The neighbor at 633 Boulevard, another house nearby, they got a similar letter from the Watcher, too.
Really?
Yep, but they just brushed it off. Didn't really think much of it.
I guess when you don't have those other letters to put it into context.
Exactly. For them, it was probably just some weird prank, but for the Broad-Deuces, it was like a confirmation of their worst fears.
Yeah, it's all about perspective, isn't it? What seems harmless to one person can be terrifying to another.
Absolutely. So the police start looking into this neighbor, Michael Langford.
Okay.
He had lived next door to 657 Boulevard since the 1960s, which kind of lined up with what the Watcher had said about their family watching the house for years.
Interesting. And was there anything else about this guy that made him seem suspicious?
Well, he was known to be a little eccentric. Walking through yards, peering into windows.
Okay. A little strange, but not necessarily a stalker.
Right. And he had also been diagnosed with schizophrenia.
That definitely adds another layer to things.
It does, but it's important to remember that not everyone with a mental illness is dangerous.
Oh, absolutely. It's a harmful stereotype to assume that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in this case, even though Michael was questioned, his family insisted he was harmless, And the police couldn't find any real evidence to link him to the letters.
So back to square one.
Pretty much. But while all this is going on, they send those letters off for forensic testing.
Makes sense. Got to try and find some fingerprints or something.
Exactly. But no fingerprints are found.
No luck there, huh?
Nope. But get this. They do find female DNA on one of the envelopes.
Wait, what? Female DNA?
Yep. So now they're thinking maybe it's a woman, or at least a woman was involved somehow.
That totally changes things.
Right. So they start looking into women connected to the case. First up, Michael Langford's sister, Abby. She was a real estate agent, so maybe she was bitter about losing the listing for 657 Boulevard.
Could be.
But they test her DNA, no match. Then they check the previous owner, Andrea Woods, just to be sure.
Got to cover all their bases.
Exactly. But no match there either.
So the mystery deepens.
It does. But they're not giving up. They bring in a forensic linguist, Robert Lenahan, to analyze the letters.
A word detective.
Basically. And he comes up with some interesting stuff.
Like what?
Well, based on the vocabulary and writing style, he thinks the writer is likely between 50 and 60 years old and an avid reader.
Wow, you can tell all that from just a few letters.
Apparently. And he even notices things like the use of 2 spaces after each period, which is something older people tend to do.
That's fascinating. So they have a possible age range and some personality insights, but still no suspect.
Right. And Derek Broaddus, he's not just sitting around waiting for the police to figure it out. He's desperate for answers, so he hires a private investigator to stake out the neighborhood.
I mean, can you blame him? He's trying to protect his family?
Totally.
Yeah.
He even consults a former FBI agent, the guy who inspired Clarice Starling in Silence of the Lambs.
Whoa, he's pulling out all the stops.
He's not messing around. He sets up webcams around the house, spends nights in the attic with binoculars trying to catch the watcher in the act.
Talk about living in fear.
Right. And then there's this other weird thing. The private investigator notices that the couple who lives behind 657 Boulevard have their deck chairs facing the Broaddus house like they're intentionally watching.
Okay, that's creepy.
Right. And get this. Their daughter had actually married a guy who used to live at 657 Boulevard.
Whoa, hold on. Could this be a connection?
It seemed like it at first, but the police investigate the couple and their family, and nothing really comes of it.
Another dead end.
Yep. It's like every time they get close to something, it just fizzles out.
So frustrating.
Totally. And remember that woman whose car was seen outside 657 Boulevard?
Yeah.
Well, turns out her boyfriend was driving her car that night.
Okay, and...
He lived near 657 Boulevard and was a gamer who played a character called the Watcher.
Seriously, you can't make this stuff up.
Right. Talk about a coincidence. But the police try to interview the boyfriend, and he never shows up.
Of course not. It's like this case is designed to drive you crazy.
It really is. So you've got the police, the private investigator, the forensic linguist, and Derek Broaddus himself all trying to solve this mystery. But the Watcher remains elusive.
And the Broaddus family is stuck with this house they can't live in and can't sell.
It's a nightmare scenario, and it's only going to get worse. So the Broadduses, they're stuck, right? They have this amazing house, but it's basically a prison of fear.
It's like that idea that home is supposed to be your safe space, and it's just been completely violated.
Exactly. And it's not just the emotional toll, it's the financial burden, too.
Mm-hmm.
They can't live in it, can't sell it, and the investigation's going nowhere.
So what do?
Well, in June 2015, they file a lawsuit against the previous owners, John and Andrea Woods.
Interesting. What were they hoping to achieve with that?
Basically, they argued that the Woods should have disclosed that letter they received before selling the house.
Ah, so they felt like they were misled in a way.
Exactly. They felt like they should have been warned about the Watcher and wanted compensation for the nightmare they were going through.
It does make you think about what sellers are obligated to disclose, right? How do you decide what's important enough to mention?
Right, and the Woods family, they denied any wrongdoing, said they didn't think the letter was a big deal.
So it turned into a legal battle.
It did, adding even more stress to an already horrible situation.
And what about the house? Did they just leave it vacant?
Well, they tried to rent it out, but they weren't going to let someone move in without knowing the risks. So they added a special clause to the lease agreement saying tenants could leave if another Watcher letter showed up.
That's smart, but also kind of sad, right? Like, this beautiful house is now tainted with this creepy history.
Yeah, it's like a warning label. Beware of the Watcher.
So did anyone rent it?
Believe it or not, yeah. And guess what?
Another letter?
Yep, just a few weeks after the new tenants moved in. And this time it was even more vicious.
How so?
It was addressed to the vile and spiteful Derek and his wench of a wife, Maria.
Oh, wow, that's awful. Like, they're still fixated on the Broadduses, even though they're not even living there anymore.
Yeah, it's like the Watcher was getting off on their fear and misery.
And did the tenants stay?
They tried, but the threats kept escalating. They demanded extra security cameras, which the producers agreed to, but it was just too much.
I can't imagine the toll that all of this was taking on them.
Oh, it was bad. They were bleeding money, paying a mortgage on a house they couldn't live in or sell. So they came up with this idea to tear the house down and subdivide the lot into 2 smaller properties.
Seemed like a practical solution.
Right. Maybe make back some of the money they lost. But the neighbors objected, said it would ruin the character of the neighborhood, and the planning board rejected the proposal.
Ugh, another dead end.
Yep, and to make matters worse, the lawsuit against the Woods family was dismissed. The judge ruled that they weren't legally obligated to disclose the letter.
So they were basically out of options.
Pretty much. They were defeated financially and emotionally.
So what happened to the house?
In the end, they had no choice but to sell it. In 2019, they finally found a buyer, but they had to sell it at a huge loss, over $400,000.
Wow, that's devastating.
It really was. And the worst part is the watcher was never caught. Their identity remains a mystery to this day.
So unsettling, right? Like, this person got away with tormenting a family for years.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder what kind of person could do something like that.
And even though this happened in this quiet, affluent town, it's a reminder that these kinds of things can happen anywhere.
Absolutely. It's a story that really makes you think about the dark side of human nature and the importance of feeling safe and secure in your own home.
And the fact that it's still unsolved just adds to the creepiness. You never know, the watcher could still be out there.
Well, that's it for our deep dive into the Watcher house. A story with more questions than answers and a whole lot of unsettling mystery.
It's one of those cases that really sticks with you.
For sure. So what do you think? Did the Broad-Deuces make the right choices? Could they have done anything differently? Let us know your theories because we'd love to hear them. And until next time, keep those lights on and those doors locked because you never know who might be watching.